I got the chance to watch Dear Mama. Oh my goodness, it was so good.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So I'm Mikayla, I'm going to start off with my first question. I want to know, how did you come to land the role of Tanisha?
Amazing. I love this question. It felt very divine that I got the opportunity to land this role. I was doing a workshop with a very dear, I would say, like friend and mentor of mine, John Bernthal. And it was an invited workshop that a casting director just so happened to be at. And she saw me work and she was like, wow, I have just the project for you to audition for. And I was like, well, my agent right over there. So if you just let them know, send it on through. And I ended up on Zoom with Winter. And it was one of those things where I had been kind of poring over. I was staying in Venice in Mr. John's house. And I was like, trying to study these lines. I told my partner, I was like, you have to get out, like, leave me alone. I'm going to be in this side of the house and you're going to be on that side of the house. And I'm just going to do this thing. And I told Winter when I got on the screen, I was like, is it okay if I just kind of play and like try some stuff? And if you have any adjustments for me, like, let me know. And immediately it felt like we had this working relationship, even in the audition room. And I think that's the biggest gift, is when you come into the audition and it feels like a work session, where you can kind of explore, ask questions, create, take notes, try something, it failed, try something again, and it succeed. And then I got the job and immediately was like, I guess I'm staying in LA a little longer.
Awesome. Now, in what ways can you relate to Tanisha's character, and in what ways do you differ?
Absolutely. So in building the backstory for this family, it was very cool with Winter and Garland Scott, who plays my father, as well as Charmaine, the writer, that we had permission to build the backstory of these characters. And the ways in which I relate to Tanisha is I grew up in a military household, and our vision for this family is that my father, and I'm speaking as Tanisha, my father was in the military. And that connection that he met his wife, my mother, while he was on a deployment, or while he was home away from a deployment, and they just kind of fell in love. Like, my parents have a very similar backstory. Both of them met while they were in the military. And the other thing is that Tanisha finds herself and her breath and her ease in music, particularly hip hop. And hip hop, R&B, all of those, like, that sound became my freedom the older I got, especially as a very sheltered child, which I believe Tanisha, that's a part of my backstory as Tanisha, is that she's pretty sheltered and she's pretty protected. And she grows up in the church, and there are certain ways in which she's been taught to negotiate social circumstances that makes her feel really restricted. And so she doesn't know how to say who she really is, even though she feels like she knows herself. She can't say it out loud in her household because those aren't the rules. That's not the social parameters of her family dynamic, which is, I think, what she's exploring in the midst of her grief over her mother, and then Tupac passing, and that being her and her mother's favorite artist. Like, that was the last living connection she had attached to her mom. And I have that with my mom. I'm grateful she's still living, but she does have a heart condition. And we've been in very precarious situations where she's had 7 heart attacks.
Oh my gosh.
And me not knowing what's going to be the last living connection I'm going to have with my mother. And trying to, like, understand that when she says, like, my mom always jokes, she says, on the right side of her heartbeat. And so I have a tattoo of her birthday on the right side of my body. And I imagine, like, that's the relationship that Tanisha and her mother had. And so I say that I'm connected to Tanisha because the ways in which she tries to find herself and her place in her relationships in the world is the same way I've tried to survive in my own world.
Awesome. Oh, and that's so cool. You have a tattoo that is kind of like so, personal to you.
Yeah, all of my tattoos. I have very many. People never know that I have them, but I think I have like 13 of them
Oh
at
my
this point.
goodness.
And you would never know. You'd have no idea.
Huh. All right. So you told me about Tanisha's, and how was Tanisha originally described to you?
Yes. So Tanisha was described as like a very quiet, struggling, like grieving 16-year-old who is trying to find her way to communicate with her father in the midst of trying to understand her own grief. And it comes out by way of slight rebellion. I mean, not to spoil it for anybody, but
Yeah.
Tanisha does something I would never do
Mm.
when I was growing up. But it's because of her because of her situation and her circumstances. And so, yeah, she was described as like a lover of hip hop. Music is her happy place. But she's struggling through a profound sense of grief and does not know how to ask for help because she can see that her father is struggling too.
Okay. Now, Dear Mama was directed by award-winning filmmaker Winter Dunn. What was it like getting to work with her, and how did her insight into your character help you during filming?
Mm. It was such a gift. I can count on one hand how many times I've been directed by a Black woman in my life, both in theater, television, and film. And so knowing the work that Winter had already done was just kind of it was an added bonus. It didn't mean anything to me, and it also meant everything to me. But it was the fact that it was Winter, the human being that I met in that audition space, that I was like, I just desperately want to work with this human being. And the moment we came into, the very first thing we ever did was do like a photo shoot for Dear Mama so that Tanisha and her mom had photos together. And the very first thing she did was like, girl, do you want to wear my earrings? For like the costume that Tanisha was wearing. And I was like, yeah. And that was the moment I was like, oh, we have a bond where this is going to be a true collaboration. And so it was all about finding Tanisha, finding those moments of silence, finding the way she can just live and breathe, and seeing somebody be so permissive with how they interacted with me meant I had permission to be myself in the space and try whatever I could. So it was Winter is a gift. This movie wouldn't be nothing without her.
Oh, that's so good to hear, the good working relationship between, actors and their directors.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I know them from watching the film, it mainly focuses on the relationship between you and your father, Nate, who was played by Garland Scott, and the way you both cope with the loss of your mother and his wife. What kind of conversations did you and Garland Scott have about your on screen relationship in order to make it as seamless and natural as it comes off on camera?
Thank you. That's always such a gift to hear when you're on camera. It don't look fake. So, um, Mr. Garland was immediately very warm and welcoming and also vulnerable in our conversations. We sat down with Winter and the script on a day where we were doing fittings, and we just kind of worked through the script, through page by page of the script, to kind of just see like, what are we feeling here? What is actually the conversation that is being had? What is the conversation that we're avoiding as well? Like, what's being lived in the silence? And we also, as actors, kind of shared a bit about our life story and our background, and not only how we related to the characters, but how we wanted to enter into this world, into this time period, because people don't realize it, but at this point, when we're doing pieces in the 90s, like these are period pieces. These are
Yeah.
time capsules that are looking back at a very specific point of time. And this is a moment in Tanisha and her father's life that we're like having a vision over. And we're getting a little insight into what's happening behind those closed doors. And so Garland being so open and forthcoming with where he came from, how he grew up, meant that I could do the same. And I felt very taken care of, very watched over by him, which meant we could trust each other to explore the really, really tough parts, especially because Tanisha and her father are like two passing ships in the night in much of this until, um, the end. And so finding a way for us to be able to know, even when we're having a really tense scene, or if I'm expressing my frustration or something like that, I can still trust the actor that is in the body that's portraying my father right now, who's making me really uncomfortable, or who doesn't realize that I'm having an anxiety attack. And so, yeah, he just took real good care of me. And what I think it's such a gift to be able to see a Black father trying to figure his way through his own grief, because we don't make space for that in mainstream storytelling at all.
We really don't. Really
Mm-mm.
don't. Now, it also, Dear Mama also focuses on the death of Tupac Shakur. I remember I was like in eighth grade when that happened. It's so
Mm,
weird to think that feels like, not that long ago.
yeah.
Now, since it focuses on the death of Tupac and how Tanisha and her father both react to the news, were you a fan of his music prior to making the film? And what is your favorite Tupac song?
Oh, this is fun. I absolutely am, it's I will say this and I will stand 10 toes down about it. You can't really grow up in a Black household and not know who Tupac Shakur is, and that music not be a pulse in your lifeline, even if you were born in 2001, which I was not. I was born in the 90s. Thank you so much. But Tupac was always a part of my life. Tupac and Biggie were incredibly important to my parents. I was born in San Diego. My family, like my parents, met in California. So that music colored the early aughts of their relationship, and colored their whole move across the country. So he's always been a part of my life. He's always been incredibly important, and prolific. And I think Tupac's music is what started giving me, Mikayla, permission to explore myself and my creativity in different ways, because activism and advocacy and speaking up and speaking out is really important to me, but I do it through storytelling more often than not. And Tupac paved the way for that to be the norm without folks even realizing it. So yes, I definitely listened to Tupac beforehand. I would say my favorite song, it's gonna sound corny, and like a cheat, but California Love goes hard.
Yes.
It really does. If you're driving down, if I'm driving down, I don't care what street I'm on in LA, it could be Wilshire. If that comes on the radio just randomly, it changes the scope of your day. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, and then also changes, if I'm going to be completely realistic. But a really fun fact is when Dear Mama had its world premiere at South by Southwest, like on the first day of South by Southwest, somehow, some way, Dear Mama just kept coming on. I'm down in San Diego on a contract right now, and someone drove past my house blasting Dear Mama. When I got into the car, Dear Mama came on Apple Music Radio. When I got to the theater, someone was playing Dear Mama. Then all of a sudden I saw someone showing a Dear Mama piece at the Tupac exhibit in LA. And I was like, hello, what's going on? Is this supposed to be my anthem of the year? Is that, so yeah, that felt like very, very divine. And
It's
Tupac,
like good. Oh yeah, it's like good vibes if you keep hearing that song. It was like it was meant to be that you were in this role.
absolutely. It was meant to be that I was in this role, and it was meant to be that this story is shared and that people are able to see themselves and Black bodies in a different space that's not reduced only to their oppression or their trauma, but the ways in which they find their way through it together.
Absolutely. Now, what were some of your most memorable moments during filming?
One sticks out in my head where there's a very tense scene in the film, and Garland and I were very much in it, in the zone, and Winter was being incredibly protective over the space. Our producers were being incredibly protected over the space, just trying to make sure that we were able to remain emotionally available in something that was really hard for us to get through. And I guess I just got a little too into it because I punched a table. And it was like, not just like a table, I'm talking oak, some nice mahogany wood or something like that. And I punched it with everything I had in my tiny body. And I was like, it hurts, it does. And all of a sudden my hand started swelling and stuff. I was like, just trying to be like, no, we're getting through this day. We have to get through this day. And everybody's like, Mikayla, do you need to go to the hospital? I was like, not right now. I don't have time for this. Like, we have to get through this shoot. This is our last, we're in our last few hours. Let's go. If anything, it'll just help. Which I'm that's not my value set. It's like, if you're hurt, like, name your limits, say a boundary, ask for help when you need it. But I ended up leaving, and I had bruised all of the ligaments in my in all of my fingers doing that scene. And so that definitely is going to stick out forever. especially because the way the team responded with such care, such love, and such an immediacy to make sure that I was okay. Um, yeah, that team took such great care of us and really wanted to like, they were like, of course the story is the priority, but you're a human first. And it's always a gift to be a part of a production that values human needs over the needs of a production.
Absolutely. So, what do you hope viewers take away from Dear Mama when they watch it?
The humanity of Black folks needs to be seen, and we need to make more space for it at every intersection of their lives. And we don't get to see a lot of Black broken hearts, Black grief, unless the goal of the story is talking, it is rooted solely in their trauma and solely in their pain. And I think you get to see a glimmer of hope in this one because you see a father and daughter trying to communicate with one another. You get to see a father and daughter both struggling with their own things. And when they come together, it's not like the explosion that happens doesn't lead with like a falling apart of absolutely everything. They end up falling apart together. And that's a story that I think is very interesting. That's a story that I think is a gift. I think that's a story that's rare, especially one that lives so much so in the silent moments in the film. We don't have to say much to be seen. It's up to the audience to decide if they want to see us, and hopefully they see a little bit of themselves in these two characters. So.
Great. Now, I know aside from acting, you are an advocate for the Black community, and you've launched forums such as Broadway for Black Lives Matter Again, the Miseducation, and Still I Write, a workshop dedicated to Black girls, just to name a few. How has working to combat racism and promote better representation and more equality within the theater acting community helped you in your career and the roles that you choose to take on?
I'm actually in the midst of learning that lesson right now, both on my current contract and a contract that I will no longer be a part of, is if I'm going to talk about the needs, the wants, and the desires of those who are directly impacted by the systems of racism that perpetuate this industry and kind of fuel this industry to be what it is today, then I have to be very specific about what I'm willing to accept. Because if I'm willing to take anything, then the folks I'm trying to crack open the door for behind me are going to be offered the same crumbs as well. And I think we're more deserving than what they have left over or what this industry has left over for us. Than what people are like, actually, this should be good enough. You should be happy to accept this. When it's like, if it's not going to sustain me, my spirit, my being, my physical well-being, then it's not going to sustain any of us, and eventually we'll burn out. So I have to be very specific about the kinds of stories I do decide to tell, which is why I decided to tell this one, because more than anything, I would like to be a part of a culture that redefines what representation for folks who look like me is in mainstream media, because I think that will make room for folks who both look like me and don't necessarily look like me, both identify the way I do and do not identify the way I do, for us to be able to come to the room authentically ourselves without having to assimilate into a culture that is not built for us in the first place.
Oh, great answer.
Thanks.
So, last question. Are there any upcoming projects you can tell us about? And are there any plans to return to theater?
So I am currently in a show right now. It's a world premiere play called The Great Con here at San Diego Rep. We're entering into our closing weekend. So if anybody has the opportunity to check that show out, it will be done at another theater. And I know this is not the end of the life for the show. I will not be a part of it after this weekend, unless, it decides to go to Broadway or something like that, and they will have me. I'd be interested. And currently the projects that are upcoming, I can't really talk about because things are still in the mix and up in the air, but I'm keeping my hopes up and keeping my fingers crossed because the Oscars are this weekend, and the film that I star in as one of the Williams sisters, King Richard, is nominated for 6 of them. So hopefully we win 1 or 2 or 3 or 7. Yeah, but we're nominated for 6. So if we won all 6, that would be crazy. But
Oh,
sending good vibes to my King Richard fam, and I'm really excited to be celebrating with them.
oh, awesome.